Please help me welcome activist, community organizer, abolitionist, lifelong learner, the fearless, freedom-oriented, Anise. Hello, Anise.
Hello. It's so nice to see you again. It's been a minute.
What was your initial interest in sociology and what motivated you to engage in the practice and study of it?
For me, as a kid who was mixed race, my Irish American family is mostly Catholic. My Pakistani family is mostly Muslim.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a great opportunity to start learning more about myself and like making sense of so much that I had experienced up until that point. I don't know if I need to learn more about colonizers, world powers. It's just not how I want to spend 4 years,
Their stories are told enough.
Their stories are told every day.
Way, but
Their stories are inaccurately told to us all the time without our consent. Maybe just like...
No one asked for this.
No one asked for this.
English is now the official language of our country.
Yeah.
For some reason, our first lady still can't speak it properly either. Whatever, be best. As a prison abolitionist, it is your aim to end prison system and policies and replace it with community care and rehabilitation. What are some alternatives to punishment and incarceration?
When we talk about prison and policing abolition, people get very panicked and they ask the questions of, okay, well, what if the harm or violence that has happened is something really serious? Putting that person in a cage, one, doesn't mean that you somehow prevented the violence from happening at all, right? Cops are not preventing anything. They react to things. There still needs to be accountability, right? There still needs to be support for the people impacted. Non-consensual removal of a person in a community from their environment, regardless of what their actions have been, that is not an effective, it is not an effective strategy, solution, route. It's just not. It's surely not also shifting either our culture or how we have relationships with one another that might and would most likely prevent that from happening to begin with.
My activism is through storytelling.
Yeah.
It does still make me question, is it enough?
We need people to storytell political education. We need people to storytell humanity. We need people to storytell and break down systemic oppression into ways that are digestible in everyday conversation. We need spaces like this.
This is the Junk and Jam Experience, the broadcast and podcast that celebrates the incredible journeys, stories, and lives of those who are dedicated to bringing joy to others. They include artists, entrepreneurs, activists, humanitarians, creators of all stripes. I'm going to throw in there civil servants who sit down with me to talk all about their impressive and diverse bodies of work. I am your host, storyteller, broadcaster, and lover of all things human, Christopher Albert de la Roa. But you could just call me Christopher Albert. Today, I am honored to uplift the causes and life's purpose of an activist, community organizer, and leader who initially reinforced their community engagement commitment with a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology, minoring in education, LGBTQ studies, and political science from UCLA, as well as a Master's of Arts from George Washington University, with a focus on organizational leadership and learning. Their academic excellence has earned them a membership with the Golden Key International Honor Society, as well as Alpha Kappa Delta, the International Sociology Honor Society. I feel like the only society I was ever part of was Menace to Society. But even then, they kicked me out of the theater because I wasn't wearing any pants. In my defense, I was on a very gay date. My guest is a devout activist and organizer centering their social impact on community care and safety, including notable experience running youth empowerment programs and as part of UCLA's project working for immigrant literacy development and Department of Social Welfare. They served those most vulnerable in underserved communities. Today, they dedicate a great deal of their work and time in protest safety, providing marshalling for demonstrations, jail support, court support, critical first aid, and self-defense. In fact, they run a bi-weekly self-defense workshop. Is it self-defense workshop? Is that okay?
Yeah, self-defense gathering. We try and keep it pretty unserious while still learning skills, having fun, empowering one another.
Okay.
Yeah.
They run a bi-weekly self-defense workshop and safe space, which is gold because they have not one but 2 black belts in Taekwondo and was a reserve athlete on the USA Taekwondo team for the 2008 Beijing Olympics. I'm impressed. Another important cause they are passionately taking on is policing and prison abolition. Mm-hmm. And one way they arm themselves for all of this good fight is with self-healing. As a lifelong learner, they are currently immersed in the art and practice of spiritual herbalism apprenticeship with the Sacred Vibes Apothecary in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Of course, you had to be a guest that forces me to see if I know how to say apothecary.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if I know how to say it all the time, to be honest.
Fun facts, they are also very skilled in ceramics, poetry, and is a former rock collector. So careful. They can and will kick and pelt you if you are looking for trouble.
I actually used to, while I was in school, elementary school, I would put rocks I had picked up just along the way in my pockets and forget to take them out. And then my parents would put my clothes in the washing machine, and those rocks would just cycle. And when I was a kid, I didn't know any better. But now as an adult, I'm just thinking about like how much that could have ruined this very vital electronic we needed in our home to have clean clothes.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Please help me welcome activist, community organizer, abolitionist, lifelong learner, the fearless, freedom-oriented, Anise. Hello, Anise.
Hello. It's so nice to see you again. It's been a minute.
Other than, breaking electronics. I want to start with sociology.
Yeah.
The study, this is me doing my research, the study of human social relationships and institutions and the understanding of the complexities of social life, social change, and the social causes and consequences of human behavior. What was your initial interest in sociology and what motivated you to engage in the practice and study of it?
Yeah, so I think it was a little bit of a winding path. So for me, I'm half Irish American, half Pakistani. And from both sides of my family, I got the sort of, you can be a doctor or a lawyer. Those are the paths that guarantee safety. That was as much as could be imagined. So even, when I had the privilege of going to college, I kind of went into it thinking, okay, I don't think I want to go into medicine, so I guess law, and I'll pick a major that can help me apply to law school later. So I was, I think, originally enrolling in international development studies, which at UCLA more or less meant, studying all of the places that have been colonized and had so much stolen, and kind of figuring out what was going on.
It's all in the museums.
It's all in the museums. Trophy cases for colonizers, truly. Yeah. And so then they bumped me to global studies, which was the study of like quote unquote world powers.
Bumped you?
The university did, because that major IDS was suspended my first quarter of my freshman year because it didn't have enough funding. Yeah. Right. So even this path to sociology was steeped in, the impact of human behavior, of what we considered valuable to study versus not, what they could get funding for. Sure. And so, from global studies, I was like, I don't know if I need to learn more about colonizers, world powers. It's just not how I want to spend 4 years,
Their stories are told enough.
Their stories are told every
day.
Way, but their stories are inaccurately told to us all the time without our consent. Maybe just like...
No one asked for this.
No one asked for this. Like, maybe...
Who is this for?
Maybe, like, hush and self-reflect. I went to a resource fair that, UCLA admin put on where you could learn more about each major and department. And I came across the sociology table. And, they shared some of the courses you could take. And it was all, the study of what is gender? how is gender constructed? How do race, class, and education determine who has access to college, who has access to what type of high school, what curriculum is even approved by states to be taught? How do teachers teach it?
Yeah.
And so at the time I was like, oh, this feels right. It's both way broad enough where if I wanted to focus on any one thing, I could, right? Through sociology, you can study anything, right? It's the study of human behavior, of humans in groups. You can use whatever lens that you want. For me, as a kid who was mixed race, my Irish American family is mostly Catholic. My Pakistani family is mostly Muslim. I was born and grew up in the U.S. and had a lot of family in other countries and other parts of the world. So how do I reconcile that? It just seemed like a great opportunity to start learning more about myself and like making sense of so much that I had experienced up until that point.
We're going to get back to your childhood, but since you absorbed so much about the whys and the hows people interact and operate, how hard is it to make friends and hold on to relationships or date?
Dating for most of my life, a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
Do you really analyze people in your life? Like, does it get down to that? Or are you finding yourself prescribing their personalities, even if it's just to yourself?
Yeah. So I think kind of some of the difference between maybe psychology, right, where you're diving more into the individual versus like sociology, which is like humans in groups, right, is you're looking at sort of the systems,
what is psychology
the structures
without being affected by social interactions or their environment?
Exactly.
Right?
And that's where I do wish that, some of these things were taught more holistically. And, if I could do undergraduate all over again, if this was even possible, I feel like I would want to triple major in sociology, psychology, and neuroscience because, I think we're taught to kind of look at the world in such small slivers. And the reality is it's all interconnected.
Black and white.
Right? Black and white, these small slivers, these small glimpses, these, kind of singular lenses. And it's composed of all of that. So in terms of dating, I think it didn't come... It didn't make dating difficult in the sense that, I'm sitting here and analyzing someone. It did make dating really difficult in the sense that I had a certain set of values or a certain understanding of, systemic oppression. And with that knowledge, wanted to make sure that I was doing what I could about it, that I was being accountable to my own need to grow, to how I could do something about it. And I wanted a partner who, at the very least, got it.
Some empathy for
this is very embarrassing.
Others.
But at one point in my 20s, I dated a white man from the UK who tried to convince me that racism didn't exist there.
Oh, God.
That was a huge lesson in, I need to love myself a little more to not stick around in that kind of dating.
I'd imagine it did teach you that. For some people, it really doesn't exist.
It doesn't at all.
If you don't have people you know and love, you go to work, you go to school, you go home, you hang out with friends, you go to the bar. Every single day of every single hour of your day, everyone is white. You do not experience racism in any way.
No. And you're not even, I think... what I've found is you might not even be motivated to care, to find out or to learn, right? Because, we are existing in a point in time where there is a lot of information available, for better, for worse, right? Some of it's absolute garbage. There are so many books available. There are so many YouTube videos available. There are so many social media posts, TikTok content that can allow folks to learn. And we've seen this, especially since October 7th of 2023, TikTok was a massive force and tool in a very rapid education.
It takes a lot of work, and you have to try really hard to stay ignorant.
Yes, thank you.
It's a lot of work
to stay
ignorant.
It's a choice. For some people, maybe it isn't, and I'll extend that grace, right? I always want to try and be understanding and also compassionate, and it's strategic, right? As an activist, as an organizer, it is strategic to get to understand where someone's ignorance might be coming from, because it gives you some clues as to what, support or conversation could be helpful. But I think for a lot of people, it is a choice.
You created and made space for someone who was ignorant to that experience, not ignorant per se as a person, right?
Yeah.
Ignorant to that experience or
Yeah.
those experiences. But there does come a point where you're probably like, oh, like if you meet him again, someone like him, you're like,
dating him was extremely embarrassing in hindsight, and I am so grateful for the friends of mine who in some ways gave me space to feel the shame of it. And I don't think shame
You shouldn't feel ashamed.
I think I should though. I think I should though, because I knew better.
Oh.
And I was kind of tied into like things.
Was he hot?
Like
he's just okay.
I don't know.
Ashamed, then.
I think there was a lot of self-reflecting that I did after that, because I knew better.
I'm gonna challenge you.
Yeah.
Instead of being ashamed, maybe you were in a certain space in that time.
Yeah.
Where maybe he was a nice escape from it all. Maybe it was nice to allow yourself to be in that space too with him.
I mean, and I think some of it is what you brought up too, of proximity, right? So when I was dating that person, I was working in the tech industry and, working in a company that, became notorious for its benefits and its on-campus benefits, but the intention of those benefits were to keep their employees on that campus constantly working.
Yeah.
I was being extremely exploited in my role. I was being underpaid. I was underleveled, all these things. And so, it was like what you described. Like I would wake up in the morning, if I remember correctly, I think I was also in a global role. So I'm working with folks around the world, every time zone. The people that I met through my workplace became, hey, let's grab a quick drink afterwards, or let's share a meal. And so I do think, it's one of the reasons why, I personally have such a love and appreciation for labor organizing, both in the wins that it's gotten us across environments, right? A 5-day work week versus more hours. When you labor organize, you're both like fighting for better conditions, but you're also actually taking time away from the company and the company's production or success or exploitation, and you're using it for other things. And while I was in this tech company, I was, leveraging the access to people and resources and folks with a lot more resources or a lot more influence or a lot more relationships than I had to work on advocacy efforts for military veterans, or addressing the modesty norms that women are held to, where if we talk about our achievements, we're seen as bragging and aggressive.
Yeah.
And if we don't, people assume we're incompetent.
I want to talk about public safety.
Yeah.
What does public safety mean to you, and how do you envision its achievement?
Public safety means that we have universal health care, right? And that includes gender-affirming health care. That includes health care for trans youth. That includes access to abortions. For me, public safety means universal housing.
We're just talking about the basics.
We're just talking about the basics.
Needs and deserves.
Right. So
dignity.
When we think about poverty, right? Poverty is targeted violence. Poverty is not, an adjective. It's not, someone's inherent character or being. It is the intentional outcome of targeted violence, right? So when we talk about public safety, I feel like a lot of the times we're talking about, this perception of safety amongst each other, right? Yeah. We talk about public safety and we think about, I want to feel, safe in my body, in my relationships, in my digital realm, in my information. And those things are really important. Yeah. And we there's a plethora of evidence that shows when we're ensuring that we're meeting each other's needs together, that we achieve that form of safety.
Yeah.
But when we talk about public safety, what I find more folks needing to talk about is it is also addressing the targeted violence of systemic oppression. It's addressing the targeted violence of the state. And we're seeing that now escalating with this administration.
Yeah, it reminds me, none of us are free until all of us are free. And then it reminds me like, oh, that could be anything. Like none of us are safe until all of us are safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we making sure people have food?
Yeah.
Right? Like I think about the connections between...
If I have, you have.
I think about the connections between the, attacks we're seeing on providing meals to children in schools, how that then impacts how you show up in school as a kid because your body's literally not being nourished in the ways that all children are deserving of. And then you think about which schools are hyper-policed. And then you think about that violence on top of it and policing being used as this, sort of punishment tool towards children. Yeah. How is that public safety?
Yes, and our capitalist society does, as someone who's had that experience, does push for us. You'll survive. This is part of a life lesson.
Yeah.
It's, whoever, it's dog eats dog, whoever makes it out of here.
It's absolute bullshit.
It's really the Hunger Games.
Yeah. Who benefits from those narratives? Who's benefiting from all of us thinking that it has to be that way? Most of the people in my life are not benefiting from it, including the people who have bought into that.
Let's talk about policing and prison abolition. According to RTI International, police violence and aggressive policing can have deeply negative implications for those who survive their injuries or even encounters, including psychological distress, illness, and degraded educational performance, and result in unfavorable attitudes toward law enforcement as well. It's like cyclical, right? And the act of over-policing, which is the excessive police presence in certain neighborhoods, let's add schools, create a sense of surveillance and intimidation. As a prison abolitionist, it is your aim to end, prison system and policies and replace it with community care and rehabilitation. What are some alternatives to punishment and incarceration?
I would really encourage folks to, especially for New Yorkers, to research how many folks are being kept in cages on Rikers Island due to nonviolent crimes. Mm-hmm. If folks want to, they can check out groups like Courtwatch NYC. So Courtwatch NYC, which I'm part of, trains volunteers to go into the courtrooms, which are public spaces. We're all allegedly, at least for now, we can all be court watchers. At least for now, allowed into courtrooms, their public spaces, to watch when arraignments are happening, right? At the point of arraignment, that means that someone's been kidnapped by the police, taken into a precinct, transferred to central bookings, and is being, forced to appear in front of a judge.
When we say kidnapped by police, there is no just cause. Are we still filling quotas? Is that a real thing?
Filling quotas is a thing. The reason why I use the word kidnapping is because that's what it is. It is a non-consensual removal of a person in a community from their environment, regardless of what their actions have been. That is not an effective. It is not an effective strategy, solution, route. It's just not, and we've seen that time and time again, right? And so Courtwatch NYC trains up folks to go into these courtrooms to record the judge's behavior, to record, what bail they may or may not set. And we see these horrible cases where, someone took a beer from a grocery store and now they're being held for $25,000 of bail. I don't drink beer because I have celiac disease. How much is a beer? Like $3, $5?
It might have gone up. It might be $3 now.
Okay.
$3-something.
$3-something, right? $3-something versus now $25,000 that you have to come up with in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, you are still in that cage. How is that? What is that accomplishing? It's sustained confinement, right? Yeah. Like they're holding onto people.
What happened when we had all of this bail reform?
Bail reform was hard fought and hard won. the law is a made-up thing, right? Like, the law is implemented and determined by the people making it up, enforcing it, implementing it, and determining it, right?
So are religious texts, sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're still seeing cases where unreasonable bail, or what most people would describe as unreasonable if they were aware of the circumstances, being set for different things, right? You know, I think a lot of the times when we talk about prison and policing abolition, people get very panicked and they ask the questions of, okay, well, what if the harm or violence that has happened is something really serious? What if someone died? What if, you know, it's domestic violence case, etc.? Even in those things, putting that person in a cage, one, doesn't mean that you somehow prevented the violence from happening at all, right? Cops are not preventing anything. They react to things. There still needs to be accountability, right? There still needs to be support for the people impacted. There still needs to be relationship repair. Accountability and some consequences might look like, hey, there needs to be distance between these two people, or this person who caused this type of harm might now be on a lifelong journey of making amends, of understanding what got to that point. But this is where, you know, just kind of blanketly throwing people in cages doesn't accomplish anything. And it's surely not also shifting either our culture or how we have relationships with one another that might and would most likely prevent that from happening to begin with.
We always cherry pick that story, and because there are so few of them.
Yes.
Of young men being detained, and now they're 40, 50 years old, and they come out and they're a different person and their life has changed. But they were going to be that anyway. They were going to be that changed person anyway. That's life.
Right. And so, you know, like I spent this past weekend at the Beyond the Bars conference at Columbia. It's on mass incarceration, and it's, you know, a gathering of people from around the country coming together to share, here's the alternatives we're implementing. Great. Here's the alternatives we're building. Here's, you know, how we need to disrupt the current systems while we are building and reinforcing something more so rooted in care.
It's not just tearing it down. It's really the thoughtfulness of what is actually needed. Mm-hmm. What do people actually need? What do we need as a society to heal, to prosper, to thrive, to be held accountable in a reasonable way that is for the benefit of everyone? You know, yes, there are victims, but a lot of the times the person who has committed a crime is also a victim. Yeah. And we keep on victimizing
and
them,
that was
right?
actually something really interesting that came up. So there was a session with Andrea Ritchie and Mariame Kaba, abolitionists, really powerful organizers. And it was a closed room session. And in the room, we were having a conversation around, you know, we are seeing an escalation of mass incarceration in the U.S. We are seeing this in the development of cop cities, like we're seeing,
so insane,
like we're seeing in Georgia. We're seeing something similar kind of being built in Queens. You can Google search this. There's a map that shows where they all are. Here in New York City, there's a mandate that they have to shut down Rikers, and instead of, you know, addressing what would you know, prevent people from being sent to Rikers to begin with, they're just building jails throughout the city. They're building a jail in Chinatown and displacing, you know, like Chinese American people. Chinatowns themselves were pulled together because of the U.S.'s staunch xenophobia, because they needed to look after one another. And so we're in this room, and, you know, we're all brainstorming and we're sharing, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. What can we learn from each other? And someone shared that some of the most staunch opposition to, dismantling mass incarceration, which also includes the concentration camps that the U.S. is responsible for of Japanese Americans and other, you know, it includes the forced migration and genocide of indigenous peoples. It includes all of this. They said the most pushback, at least, you know, where they live, that they were experiencing was from some of these larger victim services organizations. So organizations where people who have survived violence, who have experienced violence, turn to for help and support, turn to for accountability, turn to for care. And then these organizations are instead of kind of really being, accountable to that and really thinking through what is needed, they're reinforcing these mass incarceration systems. And I think about it, there's an organization here in New York City. I'm not going to say the name, but if you know, I'm sure you'll figure it out. They support survivors of sexual violence, right?
Yeah.
And that includes they have a very deep relationship with the NYPD.
Survivors of sexual violence also go to jail.
Exactly. And this organization, collaborates with the NYPD. And this is for folks who might want to file police reports. And it's also complicated, right? Sometimes if you have a child, sometimes you have to file the police report to then access other social services later. So I'm not saying it's not complicated, I promise. They're putting Band-Aids on open wounds, right? A lot of, police reform efforts, a lot of, supporting survivors of violence, whether that violence and trauma is an acute or singular incident, or whether it's the chronic trauma of surviving systemic oppression. Right? These massive organizations that are putting a Band-Aid on this open wound, they're not actually addressing the issue. And then I see traffic cops and I think about how much we as taxpayers are paying per hour for someone to be in this role of authority and kind of a threat because they're really part of the NYPD.
There to swing your dick.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think about that, and it's very petty. And, I don't wish ill on that particular individual.
No.
I want them to have health care. I want them to have housing. I want them to have food. I want them to have care and fun.
What else?
But, what the fuck are we paying this for?
Serve the community.
Exactly. Yeah. Imagine if we invested that in, I don't know, reinforcing free food programs. A tutor. Literally anything. Truly, literally anything.
Prison abolitionist and scholar Ruth Wilson Gilmore once wrote, "Those who feel in their gut deep anxiety that abolition means knock it all down, scorch the earth, and start something new, let that go. Abolition is building the future from the present in all of the ways we can." What are some of the tools available to some of these solutions that were proposed at the Beyond the Bars conference, or even systems that maybe are in place that can already be used, in the fight to abolish prisons?
And I think this is where, it gets a little bit complicated and it gets a little bit uncomfortable, right? I would say it that way, where, in my opinion, part of abolition is getting back into each other's business. There's a nosiness to abolition, right? There's a nosiness to, hey, what does my neighbor need? We may not be best friends, but we have a shared value in each other. What do they need?
Community watch,
right? There's a nosiness to, hey, there's a fight breaking out between a couple of kids in my neighborhood after school. That's not, kids are exploring boundaries. They're literally children.
Yes.
They're literally children. They're going through puberty. They're exploring boundaries.
If you have children on your lawn, guess what? You are the safekeeper of those children.
Right. Instead of this attitude.
What is so wrong with that?
Right. Exactly. And instead we're sort of taught this children's parents are the sole people responsible for them, and that's that. And so I think that the uncomfortable, unsatisfying part of my answer is that abolition is a lot of nosiness.
Yeah.
It is a lot of sweating the small stuff.
Literally knocking on doors, knowing who your neighbors are.
Exactly.
Do you have enough?
Exactly.
To eat?
Exactly.
If you don't,
right.
Let's go to this community center.
And then some of it is skill building and learning, right?
Yeah.
Are we learning skills and tools to have relationships where consent and boundaries are honored? Are we learning, skills and tools on what to do when harm happens? Conflict and harm are inevitable. They're going to happen. It's just a fact of life. the amount of violence and the type of violence that we've normalized that is systemic oppression, it is targeted violence, right, is not normal. Is way not normal. It doesn't have to be like this, y'all.
So funny whenever I see young people about to do something crazy.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes out of my mouth, I know, because this is what I was taught in the hood.
Yeah.
I know your mother taught you better than that.
Yeah.
And it always works.
It always works. If people really understood how much of an industry, right, like it running like a business, an industry that prisons and policing is, those are taxpayer dollars. That is people's time, people's energy being poured into sustaining these incredibly toxic and violent spaces, institutions, etc. Right? We see this in corporations that have infamously used prison labor to produce their products.
Yeah, sure.
In the California fires recently, it was brought to many more people's attention that there are incarcerated folks being forced to fight fires for cents on the dollars because it is offered to them as the state has you and your body and your life hostage. Will you accept this deal?
It's the fetishization of labor.
Yes. And for those same incarcerated firefighters, they're not even allowed to become firefighters in California communities once they're released from incarceration.
Back to access. Why don't they
so
have
what
the
happens
access to
then?
it? Yeah.
They have these skills. They know what they're doing. They're good at it. So when we think about, okay, what systems, what structures are alternative, it needs to happen on every level, right? We need to be thinking about ideologically, why is it that the most we can imagine of each other is brutal punishment and enslavement?
Yeah.
If you look up the Constitution, slavery is still legal to this day via incarceration, via prisons, right? We need to really think about it in our institutions. How are we reinforcing that, right? What does that mean and look like when a patient self-advocates in a hospital and someone doesn't like it? Then what happens to them? How does that look like in our schools, right? When a kid is self-advocating or is still learning boundaries or still understanding the environment, what does that look like? What does that mean for what we've internalized, what we are capable and worthy of or not? And then how does that show up interpersonally? It was very well known that a director of an organization I worked at was anti-Black and racist and micro and macro aggressing Black women in the office, right? What are my options, right? If HR is quote unquote doing their job, it's punishment and punitive, which maybe could result in that same, that white woman director losing. It doesn't solve the problem. And then the alternative was that same HR team didn't say anything. Or if they did, it was, I have questions. And so the behavior continued. And ultimately, who was experiencing the harm? The same Black women who ultimately got laid off, pushed out of that organization.
As someone who is a victim and has been a child, at least, in the injustice system. I learned that from a young person last year. I was like, yes, the injustice system. Who had parents locked up, namely my mom. She was a thief. She stole car parts for money because she was abusing drugs, heroin and crack. Stay off of the heroin and crack, guys. It wasn't until that, yes, it's part that she wanted to, but also part that she was shown that she could and that it was available to her, that she can put herself in an inpatient program that provided residential substance abuse treatment and rehabilitation, that she matured into the woman, the mother, the grandmother, the friend that she is today. She's also a community organizer and volunteer. And, almost 30 years of sobriety.
Congrats.
None of her time spent in the jail cell did that. That was a rehabilitation program meant to literally rehabilitate her instead of throwing the word rehabilitation and coupling it with a jail cell.
Yeah.
As an activist in community engagement and safety, even today there are ongoing pro-Palestinian protests. young Jewish men there with signs that literally says being anti-Israel does not mean anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
But, people don't get it.
People refuse to get it.
There are demonstrations against the growing number of over 48,000 now unarmed women, children, elderly Palestinians killed in Israel's current military campaign. Never mind the humanitarian crisis, no water, no electricity, no food, no shelter.
Yeah.
It's been bombed
Yeah.
with our equipment.
Yeah. Hospitals, universities, gone.
Yes. Of course, it was in response to the horrific Hamas-led attack in 2023. 1,200 unarmed people were killed. 240 hostages were taken. Which was in response
An
to
ongoing occupation.
decades-long unjust occupations of Israel, of the West Bank, Gaza Strip. And it's been an ongoing fight because it's internationally recognized as a sovereign territory of the state of Palestine. And even after many decades of people of Palestine supporting the resolution through diplomacy and negotiations, they just felt, an Islamic resistant movement felt it wasn't working. We're talking about victims begetting more victims again. What has been your experience being on the ground in many of these demonstrations? Obviously, we've had Black Lives Matter recently as well. What do people want to be taken away from these demonstrations?
In some ways, it depends on the organizing group.
Yeah.
Deepa Ayer of Building Movement Project has a really cool tool or framework called a social change ecosystem. And it describes kind of the common types of roles you see in social change movements. And so I think there's that kind of layer of, people who are using different tactics, different lanes to advocate for social change. There's a range of what it means to folks, taking the streets and different types of actions that are happening.
Yeah.
This is not very dissimilar to what we saw in 2020, right? We saw people all over the U.S. rise up because most of them believed that George should still be alive.
Yeah.
Right? And not every person taking the streets was an abolitionist. There were some people who felt that George should be alive because he still should have been kidnapped by cops and put in a cage and gone through the criminal injustice, the legal injustice systems, right? There were other folks who believed, hey, if we could just, maybe punish the cops who did it, maybe reform a few things, like that's what should be done. There are folks who believed that, there needs to be total and complete prison and policing abolition and everything that entails, right? That entails dismantling, that entails building, that entails reimagining, and that entails revisiting a lot of the approaches to safety that many of our indigenous communities globally used, as groups of people where conflict and harm happens to figure shit out.
Yes.
When it comes to, this uprising and this mass mobilization we've seen since October of 2023, there has been that range. There are some groups who feel that a two-state solution or, there should be a ceasefire and then we'll just kind of figure it out, right? And for a lot of those groups, they're not very dissimilar to the reformists, the police reformists of 2020.
It's like what you're saying, like people are taking up causes in different ways at different junctures.
Right.
And all of them are just as important and relevant.
There's kind of a deepening of understanding that needs to happen is what are you calling for something that is putting a Band-Aid on an open wound, but still essentially normalizing what's going on. A ceasefire is not enough. A ceasefire is the bare minimum, right? The groups that I've been so grateful for and I've learned from and it's been humbling to be side by side with are the ones who are advocating for Palestinian liberation, right? They are advocating for a returning of lands that is very similar to the land back movement here in the U.S. that also gets deeply misinterpreted to presume that the land back of Turtle Island to the indigenous stewards of these lands somehow means that the same white colonizer fuck shit, is then going to happen to white people. These young people across campuses advocating for Palestinian liberation, and that being kind of, warped to say somehow that the liberation of Palestinian people is at odds with the safety of Jewish peoples, when the reality is those two things are linked. You start learning about how Britain was considering different pockets of land as, this will be the homeland for Jewish people, which to me inherently is still anti-Semitic. It's still not addressing the issue. Like, Jewish people should be safe on their bodies no matter where they are in the world.
Yeah.
Right? And from World War II, that wasn't really addressed. Even in the U.S. did not want to help or support Jewish people being persecuted by the Holocaust. And also, Jewish people weren't the only people persecuted during the Holocaust. It also included, trans folks. It included Romani peoples. It included disabled peoples. And then we're seeing that kind of all happen in real time here in the U.S. today with the attacks on trans healthcare, with, what's going on.
Anyone who didn't fit the mold.
Right. Many takeaways, some of which have, thank God, evolved from the original takeaway of what some groups were advocating for to be more complex, to be more bold, is the complete liberation of Palestinian people.
Yes.
And it is not any different than how here in the U.S., we need to be working towards Black liberation. We need to be working towards land back. And we cannot afford to slide back. That needs to be the line we're holding. And with the Jewish people that I'm in community with, because they have been brave enough to speak up for what's right and for what's liberatory, they've faced consequences within their own community and then we see folks like Ta-Nehisi Coates, right, go to Palestine and experience it firsthand. And so I think there's power in those narratives. I think something that continuously is a misstep by many is not centering the Palestinian people. We also need to be thinking about who we're more willing to listen to about their own experience of oppression versus not.
Yeah. Anise?
Yes.
Time is winding down.
Okay.
I mean, there's so much to talk about.
I know. This has been so nice.
I actually produced like a 5-hour show for us. But I did want, if it's okay with you, to play a little game. We're going to make some time for a little game.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much for all your insight and being so vulnerable to share your experiences. I want to say you've worn, I don't know if it was a dupatta before. I know there's many names or many different reasons. You have hijab, niqab, chador, kimad, jilbab, burqa. For some women, wearing a Muslim headdress is an assertion of her religious or cultural identity. For others, it is a symbol of oppression.
It's complicated.
It's complicated. And while there are instances of oppressive enforcement, particularly in the Taliban rule in Afghanistan, there are plenty of Muslim women who do not observe any special dress rules. And it is a misconception to think that women have no choice in the matter.
Yeah. If we're going to be talking about how religion becomes weaponized as a tool to enforce oppression, Christianity needs to be catching a whole lot more heat.
I agree. The point of today was actually to celebrate Muslim women. Muslim women are diverse in their appearance. They might not always look visibly Muslim, as we have discussed. In celebration of the beauty and freedom of Muslim women everywhere, we have decided, me, to put men instead behind modesty garments. In a game I call, Whose Day Is, Huh? What?
Oh.
Because even though English is now the official language of our country,
God.
For some reason, our first lady still can't speak it properly either. Whatever, be best. So I am going to show you a picture of a famous Muslim man.
Oh no, I'm so bad at games like
I'm going to give you a clue. I'm going to
Okay.
read aloud a cue. But the only thing that will be visible to you are his eyes. And instead of a burqa, he's veiled behind a brick wall.
Stop.
So you ready for your first clue?
Yeah, that's a lot of graphic design.
A little bit. We threw in some. We threw in some design here. You ready for your first clue?
Yeah.
He was an American professional boxer, humanitarian, and social activist. Not only is he cited as the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time, but also known as the champion of freedom for his activism in protesting the draft, speaking out against war, and supporting civil rights demonstrations.
Muhammad Ali.
It is Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
Yay, look at you.
And my dad loves Muhammad Ali,
Yeah.
so then I learned more and also was a fangirl. I wasn't allowed to watch the movie because I was too young and the content was too whatever, according to my parents. I was so mad about it. And to this day, I still think I haven't seen it.
You need to.
I think,
Maybe this is a reminder.
maybe I'll do that tonight.
By the way, one of his famous quotes is oftenly misquoted as fly like a butterfly, but it's float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. His hands can't hit what his eyes can't see. Outside boxing, Muhammad Ali attained success as a spoken word artist, releasing 2 studio albums, one of them being I Am the Greatest in 1963. Both albums received Grammy Award nominations. Okay, ready for your next clue?
Okay, yeah. This isn't so bad so far.
While this English singer-songwriter auditioned as a solo contestant for the British music competition television series The X Factor in 2010, he ended up being part of a 5-piece boy band, all going in the same path. He is the only artist to have won the Billboard Music Award for New Artist of the Year twice,
Congrats.
receiving one for being a member of his band and once again being a soloist. He also shares a child with international model Gigi Hadid.
Zayn from One Direction?
Yeah.
Okay.
League.
Cutie.
Zayn speaks English and Urdu, and he can read Arabic.
Urdu is the same language my family speaks, actually.
Yeah. He's born to immigrant Pakistani Muslim father and a white British mother. Guess what? Of English and Irish descent.
We should talk sometime.
Yeah.
We could talk about what it's like being in that situation with
That's
parents.
true. Friends,
That's what I meant.
BFFs.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay. He is an American DJ and record producer known as the Anthem King. His records are known for his voice presence, motivational quotes, maximalist production styles, and numerous catchphrases, including another one. Who is he?
I'm blanking on this one. I don't know.
Okay.
I think when you say it, I won't be surprised, but I
Yes,
can't think of
it
his
is
name.
DJ Khaled.
Okay.
Outside of music, Khalid has gained success as a writer with his book, The Keys, being featured on the New York Times bestseller list. He's born to Palestinian parents who immigrated to the United States.
The
Okay.
Hot Ones episode he did was really funny. He was kind of a baby about it.
What's really interesting is you never really hear someone give credit to their success to Catholicism. But a lot of these men give credit to their success to Islam
Yeah.
and to their faith.
Yeah.
Okay, so next clue. He's an American actor who's the recipient of 2 Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor, best known for his roles in Netflix House of Cards and movies such as Moonlight and Green Book, but also he starred in Hunger Games and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
I know who he is. I don't know his name.
It is Mahershala Ali. He converted to Islam in 2000 and actually signed the Artist for Ceasefire letter calling for a ceasefire in the 2023 Gaza war. So I guess we'll also call him an activist.
Yeah, he's an ally for sure.
Last one. See, not a long game.
Yeah, I think I'm like 50%, like still kind of failing, but not.
No, there's no such feeling. We're just having fun. I'm not very competitive. I just really like to, obviously that's why I'm not an athlete. But I will always bet on myself when it comes to karaoke.
Oh, what's your go-to song?
Anything Stevie Wonder.
Okay.
But I still need to warm up. I do have a go-to song from India Ari.
Really?
Who I love. Yes. Ready for Love. Love that song. What's yours?
I feel like I'm more of a background singer. You know, I'm like the hype club. Like I'll dance and I'll background sing.
He's an American former professional basketball player who is a sports analyst who in his 19-year career earned 4 championships, 3 All-Star Game MVPs. He played with Orlando Magic, Miami Heat, Phoenix Suns, the Cleveland Cavaliers, Boston Celtics, and I want to say most famously for LA Lakers. He's also appeared in numerous movies as well as starred in numerous national commercials alongside a general.
So I have to admit, I'm really bad at popular sports. Basketball, football, I just never really got into it.
Or your dear good friend, Shaquille O'Neal.
Nice.
Raised by a Baptist mother and a Muslim stepfather. And he was taught and raised in both religions.
Yeah.
Which I guess many people are.
Yeah.
As you were.
Yeah, I mean, I found it really valuable because I think there's a lot of shared values.
Be a good shepherd of the earth.
Don't be an asshole.
Don't be an
Too
asshole.
long, don't read. Don't be an asshole. I was living in Texas, and I went to a Christian high school. It was like a long story how I got there. And I was valedictorian, and they were really upset because they didn't want a Muslim girl being the valedictorian of a Christian high school. So I had to interview. And they asked me basically, one, if I was Christian, and that was the only question. And they kept repeating it. And I remember being like, why is this grown white man asking me the same question over and over again? And just completely ignoring everything I was saying of like, I'm not, but here's what I've learned. Here's the similarities.
Welcome to America. Okay, so I want to talk real quickly about the art and practice of spiritual herbalism, the apprenticeship program. I believe you're in it now.
Yeah.
Created by the Sacred Vibes Apothecary. Founded by master herbalist Karen and Rose. The apprenticeship provides access to plant medicine to improve quality of life with the deep understanding that spiritual and physical healing are intertwined. What have you been learning so far?
I actually found out about this offering that Empress Karen has organized for, I think, a handful of years now, or for like quite some time, through a former coworker who had gone through the program. And this person was using plant medicine to provide care and supports to frontline activists. Young people are literally putting their lives on the line to fight for a better future for all of us.
Yeah.
Based on the violence and oppression that they've been born into or inherited. You know, like when we think about climate crisis, like I can't imagine what it must be like to be a teenager or a young person right now.
Anxiety.
In this program, it's a really beautiful, holistic approach to plant medicine. So, you know, there's been some ways in which plant medicine has really been appropriated by white herbalists.
Sure.
Right? Where they are still being extractive.
Shampoo, lotion.
Right. They're being
makeup.
Extractive towards plants, or they're not connecting it to systemic oppression. They're not understanding how these things interplay.
You have to pillage and rape lands to get these resources.
Exactly.
And displace people who live there.
Right. There's a part of me that grieves the access that, you know, white European American people have had to South Asian healing, you know, practices and cultures and rituals that I've had to really grapple with and fight for in ways because it hasn't been there because of, you know, like family disconnect or whatever it might be. And like, it makes me really fucking angry. So in this program, you know, Empress Karen really centers it in Black and Indigenous liberation and healing first and foremost. In many ways, I am a guest in the space, right? I am a guest.
A welcomed guest.
A welcome guest. And also, you know, I think she does a phenomenal job of creating a space where we can learn more about our own bodily systems. So it's a bit of biology, it's a bit of spiritual learning, it's the connection of the two. We're learning the plants. We're also learning ways in which the plants can be used. And so it's been really phenomenal. And so when I was applying for the program in particular, one of the things that I said I would love to utilize the knowledge for as I feel more confident in it, as I learn more, is, you know, what does this look like for supporting people's nervous systems who are experiencing state violence? Some of these really brutal arrests and hospitalizations that are happening. It's also like the everyday stress of, you know, the cops who are harassing people constantly in the subways, right? It's also the everyday stress of trying to make ends meet.
I'm going to quote you now.
Oh, no.
We all have opportunities for and responsibilities to liberation. We also have a poem from Palestine to Pakistan. Rise up for liberation however you can. When our present becomes your history, when future generations look back and ask, were you part of the change or complicit? I hope your response is, I did everything, I tried everything. You just mentioned it, right? I was someone who grew up, in a family, who were policed.
Yeah.
And I have found, I am uncomfortable being too close, to those in blue, even like in Pride and Puerto Rican Day parades.
Yeah.
It's just too many police
But
for
also,
me.
why do we have cops at Pride when Pride was a riot against police brutality and surveillance? Get out of Pride. Go home.
I found that my activism is through storytelling.
Yeah.
That's my strength, but sometimes it does still make me question, is it enough? Because, it terrifies me to be in spaces where police are. What is your advice for those who are not sure where to begin to take action on the injustices that they want to address, but don't know how?
I would say that tool I mentioned earlier, building movement projects, social change ecosystem, can be really valuable in finding kind of what is it you like to do? What are you really good at? You're really good at storytelling. We need people to storytell political education. We need people to storytell humanity. We need people to storytell and break down systemic oppression into ways that are digestible in everyday conversation. We need spaces like this. Right? So I think that tool is phenomenal. The second thing I would say is I'm scared all the time, chronic anxiety, scared all the time. Right. I think in social media, we only see, the photo of bravery or the courage. And those folks are scared too, and it's okay. It's scary. It's okay.
Courage is not the absence of fear.
Right. And I think the third thing that I would say, so Mariam Kaba, check her out if you don't know who she is. She's a baddie. She wrote or said, hope is a discipline. Hope that something better is not only possible, but our liberation is just on the other side of this. If we can just get over this, our liberation is there. It's a discipline, which means that it's something you can practice every day. You can practice anarchist calisthenics, right? You can practice saying no. You can practice speaking up in your workplace. Those everyday ways we practice pushing back. My partner organizes these really cool game nights that are, I don't know if they'll ever call them this, but they're healing justice spaces. They started off as a healing justice space where they wanted to process what we were experiencing on the ground.
It's not trivial if it helps.
It's not trivial if it helps, and bring purpose and intention into it.
Oh, you're going to have to tell me when these are. I want to go.
You should come.
Thank you so very much, Anise.
Thank you so much for having me.
This was fabulous. I kept you way longer.
It's all good. It's all good.